comfort, no need to hold or look at a screen with you all the time.
Beautiful girl asked me, "Who are you really, hell?" I was able to pronounce my name in a stuttering voice, D. Darren. She examined me with her eyes. Her eyes were wandering on my body from top to bottom. And she did the same with her. Oh my God, how beautiful she was. Her poetry was really dark. Her eyes were like emeralds. After moments of embarrassing silence, the human being on the bed in the corner made a sound. The girl and I looked at the human being who made a vote. "He's hungry. That's Ekbari," said the girl, without looking at me. I have cleared the room more comprehensively. The third family was, if you could call it, too thin and stained with blood. It looks like a bed at the nurse's office. "My name is Shiloh," said the beautiful girl. When she said her name, it seemed like a chorus of angels was singing. "Shiloh," I muttered myself. Shiloh asked me suspiciously, "What are you waiting for?" I told her how the cops assumed that I was crazy, just because I killed my father and my friend, and how I engraved the word, bad, on my arm. "That's unfortunate," was all she said. "I was expecting you to be afraid of what I did. Or, at least, condemn me as others have done." Shiloh referred to the clothes that are still in my hand, saying, "Maybe you should change your clothes to those clothes you have there." Then she laughed. "Where should I change my clothes?" "In the same place you are now. You have to get used to it. We must all change our clothes together." She sighed. I turned around and took off my shirt and put on a new shirt. Then I went to my pants. I tried to change my old underwear to my new clothes as quickly as possible. As soon as I wore my loose-fitting clothes, I went back to Shiloh. She had returned to reading her book. "Is this my bed?" Shiloh asked. "Yes, unless you want to sleep on the floor." I lay on the rusty bed and closed my eyes, and suddenly, I found a little hand holding my arm. There were sharp nails that penetrated my flesh. I opened my eyes to see the slender figure of my other roommate in the room. "Come, Ekbari. It's time for a daily surgery." A middle-aged nurse was standing at the door with a wheelchair. It had restrictions on the wrists and ankles. The nurse smiled maliciously when she saw Ekbari scratching my arm. It was a look of terror on his little face. The nurse came forward, stretched out her hands, and picked up Ekbar. Her strength was much more than what I had imagined a young woman of her age. She was able to put the squishy Ekbari in the wheelchair, tie the chains, and give him what I assumed he was sedating in his arm. Nurse Ekbar is now escorted out of the room and to the bottom of the corridor. "Okay," I said cautiously, "I told you about myself. I think it's fair to tell me something about yourself. Why are you here?" Shiloh raised her attention to her book again. "Come here." She patted on the bed next to her. I got up and sat next to her. Our legs were almost touching each other. Shiloh sighed. "Okay, I suppose you met Mrs. Price." I nodded, remembering the unpalatable encounter with the woman. "Okay, it's my mom." I stared at her, a bit arranging. "But you're not like her at all." I stopped talking. "Yes." I stopped for a moment. "I look and act and think like my father, do you see? He was supposed to be very kind. Until he married my mother. I made him go crazy." Shiloh started wrapping her arms around my shoulder, and put her head next to my head. "My father eventually committed suicide because of her and tried to kill me with him." I saw a hidden hell of tears hiding behind her beautiful eyes. "He didn't want me to live with the filth that gave birth to me." She was crying now silently on my shoulder. She gently rested her face on the back of her head, and inhaled the light vanilla scent from her hair. Her shirt is indifferent to reveal her chest full of 2 very clear stab wounds. "Oh my God, why did you have to make it so perfect?" I raised my knee to my chest to prevent any unwanted hormonal reactions. I grabbed my hand and gently pointed my fingers over the scars. She had a wonderful touch of her skin. I sent a little chill Sarah in my back. I was stabbed with a pocket knife when I got home from school one day after I went to the hospital and got better. Shiloh lowered her shirt. I was the first person to be accepted into Mrs. Price's home for the insane. It was my home in the past. Then I turned it into a temporary shelter for the insane. She returned to her previous position, and sat leaning on me. But this time, I extended my hand around her waist and pulled her towards her. We didn't talk for half an hour. We simply sat there. We enjoyed with each other. I felt a bond that was not mentioned between us. Shiloh only said anything when I moved my arm to examine the long cross-cut scars on her wrists. I whispered in my ear, "We can talk about this, right?" The door opened, then a squeak was high, and the same nurse entered who took Ekbari. I took him out of the wheelchair, then put him on his bed. Immediately, Ekbari shrank into the fetal position and started snoring. Then the nurse went to Shiloh's bed and said, "Darren, it's your turn now." She was beautiful. The nurse held my shoulder, which made me feel very nervous. I don't like anyone to touch me. I did not resist the nurse, and she was guiding me to the wheelchair. I looked at Shiloh when I was taken out of room 17. I tried to save the turns we took. From going down, we went up. "Where are we going?" asked the fat nurse. "Every day, you have to go back to the stairs, but you need to receive a special treatment from our good resident doctor." I turned my head back and looked at the nurse's face. She was clearly smiling. Did they teach you in medical school how to smile, stupid? Or is it just something you learned from Mrs. Price? I saw a glow in her eyes, which made me realize that I had reached her. She turned me around and started pulling me up the stairs. I imagined that she might have been trying to make my journey more painful because of my previous comment. I was pushed up the stairs. When we finally reached the top of the stairs, I saw traces of scratches on the stairs. And I assumed that the wheelchair wasn't too much for these stairs. We got to one of the small, dark rooms on the 3rd floor. There were only a few rooms on this floor, unlike the other 2 floors. "Wow, you must be our new patient, Darren," a man with a deep voice spoke from the corner of the room. "Yes," the nurse replied, "Darren here for treatment of schizophrenia, autism and psychopathic tendencies." The doctor smiled. "I will take good care of him." The nurse left the room, leaving the doctor alone. He dragged me into a large sink located in one corner of the room. There was only one window in the room, so the entire area was naturally very dark. The doctor lit a large medical light, immersing the room with a pale yellow light. "It's natural that you want to know my name, Darren. I'm sure you're going to want to know the treatment I'm giving you. Unscrew the stents from my wrist, then bend down to remove them from my ankles." I didn't answer it. He continued his speech. "Well, first of all, my name is Dr. Hansen." He stood up and confronted me, then continued his speech. "As for your treatment, I plan to try some electrical therapy to get your brain cells to work the way they should. I will also give you different injections to help get rid of your illusions." Strictness. He smiled again. Dr. Hansen opened the bathtub faucet at a high temperature. "Today we'll start with some electric shock therapy, and then I'll give you some injections." When the bathtub was filled with 3/4, Dr. Hansen closed the water. "I will have to ask you to take off your clothes. If you don't want to take it off yourself, I will have to." He smiled, as if the idea of taking off his clothes himself was fun. I stood up and took off my shirt, then I took off everything else. "Now, please allow me to connect these electrodes to you. Take a spoonful of the sticky material, and spread it on a circular object connected to a wire. Do this with many other electrodes-like things, then pick up the first one and place it on the right side of my chest." I didn't like the feeling of a man's fingers on my chest. I also hated the humidity that was emanating from anything that was stuck in my chest. Dr. Hansen installed 4 more electrodes on my body. One on the other side of my chest, one on both sides of my temporal, and one on my throat. "Okay, Darren, please go into the sink, then we can follow up on the treatment." I did as he said. "What's the hell?" I screamed. "It's so cool. It's all part of the treatment, Darren. You'll get used to it." I sat down, though my mind was telling me, "Now just relax, I'll start the device, and then it will make you feel weird, but don't worry," said Dr. Hansen. The shelter of horror login, I sighed and closed my eyes. I heard an electronic buzzing sound, and then suddenly I felt a slight tingling starting in my chest, and then spreading to the rest of my body. Then the tingling increased slowly to the point of burning. "Oh," I screamed. I felt like my body was on fire. "Just calm down, Darren. It's over soon." The next thing I knew was that I felt a quick and violent shiver. Soon the pain became almost unbearable. Then it stopped. "Look, it wasn't too bad, aren't it?" Dr. Hansen asked me, giving me a towel. I got up and dried myself. Melissa, you can come to bring Darren. Talk to your doctor via the intercom on the wall. I put my clothes on again, and then I sat in a wheelchair. I wasn't sure whether I was cold or I was still interacting with electricity. Moments later, the nurse Melissa entered the room, and she and the good doctor restrained me. Then Melissa quickly took me out of the room. We went down the stairs again, and then went back to room 17. When we entered, she was noticed that Shiloh was not in her bed. The nurse asked, "Where did you say it?" The nurse replied, "It's almost on time." Then I took the chains off me again. The nurse left, and lay on my bed. Suddenly, another nurse came in, and brought Shiloh, who seemed to be very annoyed, into the room. Then the other nurse broke the Shiloh belt, then left her standing in the middle of the room. She buried her head in my cold chest. I asked her, "What did they do to you?" She took him to my bed, and then turned to the doctor. Shiloh did not answer me, but remained silent. I couldn't tell whether I was still shivering, or was it the reason. I prayed to everyone who hears me so that you don't cry. I also prayed that my worst concern about it was unreasonable. But here, at Mrs. Bryce's home, I didn't know if ethics were an idea for the house's workers. There was an annoying sound of metal hitting the metal around the house. The entire floor seemed to be groaning because the patients got off their metal beds. I felt very pressured around my head. This was due to the noise. I know that. She looked at her eyes and noticed that they were red and swollen. She said, "It's time for me to see her head to dinner." We stood. Shiloh headed towards the small block on the third bed. Ikbari made a faint cry when she carried him to Shiloh. It looked worse than it was before the nurse came to take it. I glanced at the open doors along the hall as I followed Shiloh. There were adults with distorted, twisted bodies and young children with eyes that lacked spirit. Even lumps of skin and bones do not resemble any natural human shape. But I didn't feel anything about them. So they were destined to be, right? After we reached the end of the hallway, the room opened. It was a spacious, rectangular room with large windows on both sides. There were already some people inside, sitting on single chairs lined up on several long tables. We sat in the corner of the room at the far end of the table. After a few minutes of silence, most patients entered the dining hall and found seats. "Eat it." I distributed several trays full of mashed food. When one of the trays landed in front of me, I was able to see what was there were mashed potatoes, applesauce and some types of meat. Maybe pork. People with severe intellectual disability had to use nurses to help them eat. Those who did not seek nurses had to seek the help of other patients who were more efficient to feed them. And that's what Shiloh was doing with the little Ekabari, who was lying on her lap. She saw her feeding him everything, except the meat. I slowly turned to my tray. I was a plant, so I left the meat. When Shiloh finished feeding Ike, she started eating her own food. She noticed that she hadn't eaten any meat. She asked her, "Are you two vegetarians?" "Yes." Shiloh gave a quiet laugh. "No," and put another spoonful of mashed potatoes in her mouth. "Never eat the meat here." I asked her, "Why?" Shiloh just smiled, and swallowed her food. "You'll find out well enough. Don't eat." We walked back to our room after dinner. I felt my stomach gurgling, indicating that I was still hungry. I sat on my bed and now noticed the small turntable in the corner of the room next to an expiry bed. Shiloh asked, "Are there any discs?" She replied, "There are 3 cylinders." Then I went to the corner and picked up a thin pile of cylinders. "Here's it," she said, taking me the pile. I looked at the discs. It was the Best of Bread albums, The Police, Ghost in Machine, and Frank Sinatra's birthday album. "Well, it will be useful after about 4 months," I said. Shiloh smiled. She was sitting on the side of the Ekbari bed, caressing his little head. The time is now about 29 minutes in the evening, at least for the old clock hanging on the wooden wall. We heard a sharp knock on the door. A different nurse entered than the former nurse, rolling in a wheelchair. "It is necessary for you, since you are new, to be examined by our other doctor." Her eyes turned from the chair to the chair. "I don't like to take people to see Dr. Zenith, but I should." She went to me and put me in a wheelchair. She looked at Shiloh, who was looking out the little window by her bed. It seemed like she was trying to hold back her tears. The shelter of horror logged into Dr. Hansen's room. We went to a room at the end of the corridor. The nurse pulled me up as a direction up the stairs. This time, it's upset. The only light in the hallway was a strip of light coming from the bottom of the door. He made a mistake. Then he opened the door and I saw a very tall man. So tall that his head was almost touching the door arch. I was able to see him better now, though. I was taken to the room in a wheelchair while the doctor stepped aside. He had a few grays of hair on top of his head, barely covering the scars and skin spots, as the light was still almost faint. His eyes were too narrow, which always gave him a bliss. The room was covered with dark wooden planks, like the rest of the house. The only difference between this room and the rest of the house was the feeling. It was very cold. Although the autumn was approaching, the rest of the house was still a bit warm. Suddenly I heard cold air coming from behind me. I turned my head and noticed that the nurse closed the door and left me alone with this eagle-like man. Darren. His eyes were shining. Dr. Zenith. He opened his mouth and I saw his teeth. They were all round, yellow and faint. He rolled me under the bright medical light. Now, I need to take a skin sample to see if you are healthy. He was still smiling as he stretched out his hand to a small table next to the bed. His spider-like fingers were feeling the place until she finally found what she was looking for. Scalpel. He put his bone hand on my bandaged wrists. On the other hand, he held a scalpel of blood and rust. He was still smiling, and pressed the small metal piece on my wrist. While the first incision was made to the left of the vein, I felt every small crust of rust entering the bloodstream. He continued to cut my flesh and the pain slowly subsided until it became plump. My skin was bleeding a lot now. He had almost finished making an oval shape on my wrist. Dr. Zenith lifted a piece of leather 1.5 inches long from my wrists, then put it on the table where he removed the scalpel. "Thank you, Darren," said Dr. Zenith. Then he smiled as he put on a small tape of gauze around my wrist, which was bleeding heavily, and then installed it, and then walked towards a small wood-burning stove. "Turn on the fire and take out an article from the stove, then take a box of oil and pour some of it into the article." Once it caught a lot of fire, the doctor put the article on a metal shelf. "Now, I need to take a blood sample to determine your blood type." He took a needle and put it in a vein, and it didn't bother to wrap a rubber band around the biceps. "When it's over, it's a scary shelter." He sprayed some of my blood on the painter's painting. Only one of them interacted. He said, "B negative. This is very rare." Then he smiled a resolute smile, sprinkling the rest of my blood in his mouth. "Are you a vampire or something?" I asked him. Dr. Zenith laughed. "No, I just love iron-filled snacks." He smiled again and picked up the little piece of meat that was separated from me. "Go to the fire and put my skin on the article." He was making a blush. I saw him slowly crunchy from the corner of my eye, as I could no longer move my head anymore. "Once the doctor is convinced, use the scalpel he just used on my wrists to pick up a piece of flesh from the article." He bit a small part of it, chewed it, and then swallowed it. This weird form of cannibal made me feel like vomiting. Now I know why Shiloh told me not to eat meat. Dr. Zenith's eyes widened. Then I vomited near my feet. "Oh, your taste is disgusting." I spit on my face. "Do you drink?" he asked me. I nodded, and I didn't know whether it was about regular fluids or alcohol. "You taste like vodka." I drank vodka a lot. He sighed. "I think we'll have to get you on a diet to get rid of toxins for a while." "Nothing but water is yours." She went backwards. I avoided looking at Dr. Zenith when I entered and grabbed my wheelchair handles. "Then you pushed me out." Then I went down the stairs. "I'm sorry." That was all she said before we entered my room. "You left me and then left quickly." She turned around and noticed that Shiloh was sitting on her bed looking at me the same way she looked at me a few hours ago. "I know why you don't eat meat," I told her. She smiled at me kindly. "Come here." Shiloh indicated to me sitting on her bed. I grabbed my wrist and looked at it. Then, "Do you taste delicious?" Shiloh said. I said, smiling, and said, "My taste is disgusting and I love vodka." She smiled anyway. "I am not allowed to eat." That's what my mom said. We talked for a few minutes, then decided to sleep. The time was 12:39 a.m. I took off my shirt and pants, then went to bed. The light had already gone out. The electricity goes out to the entire floor at 9 p.m. Quote. Can I sleep with you? I turned next to me to see Shiloh standing in her underwear, next to my bed. Oh, yes, I definitely smiled, and then walked in front of me. She crawled under the covers and hugged me, barely touching my chest. Her hips were pressed onto the hip. I felt like I was in heaven. Log in. How old are you? I asked her. 17 years old, she answered. And you? I'm 19 years old, I said, disappointed, because Shiloh is still deficient, as if she could sense my thoughts. It's not illegal if no one knows. I touched her lips. I was longing for more, but Shiloh turned around. She pressed her body on my body, and felt a little embarrassed. My body was overpowering me. I smelled her hair, and liked her scent. I continued to breathe her scent until we finally fell asleep. Now I know. He woke me up. Shiloh was already dressed and styling her hair as she looked in the little mirror next to her bed. I sat down and got dressed from the day before. Shiloh gave me a hooded jacket. My face frowns, trying not to scream while the sleeves rubbed with all the wounds I had from the day before. I heard a knock on the door. The door is closed while I was wearing my shirt. She entered the room, saying, "Darren, Shiloh. Today is the day when everyone can go out to the store." Shiloh's face shone and she said, "Ms. Price insists that we go right after breakfast." Then she touched her shirt with her fingers and said, "I will leave." Then Katya left the room and closed the door behind her. Yeah, Shiloh jumped with joy. Finally I will be able to get out of here again. I looked at her confused. Every month we go to a store, and then we get $10 to spend on what we want. It's so much fun. I loved seeing Shiloh happy. It really made me happy. We went for breakfast and had eaten with Ekbari. And after we finished, we walked back to our room. Shiloh and I put on our athletic shoes and then headed downstairs. There were about 5 other people who looked normal. 3 of them seemed to be the same age as I am and Omar Shiloh. There was a little boy with blonde hair and blue eyes looking at me. I don't like children. The 5th patient appeared to be almost in his 30s, although he seemed to be a lot older. Perhaps it was due to the treats of doctors. 2 boys of my age were talking to each other. The girl who looked younger than me was looking at the ground and smiling. She was one of the few here who looked really crazy. Mrs. Price went out of her office to the hall where we were all. "Let's all get into the car and go out, isn't it?" she said with a fake smile. She did not wait for an answer. But I came out of the front door. We followed it. 15 minutes later, we were getting into the Mitchell store car park. Paradoxically, Mitchell's store was a pharmacy, so we got out of the car. I was the first person to get out of the car. I hate touching people, as I hate people touching me. Unfortunately, I was in between the kid and the crazy girl. When we got out of the car, I noticed that the 2 men were looking at Shiloh. I was overwhelmed by a wave of anger. It was the same wave of anger that made me kill my father and my ex-girlfriend. I started thinking about a way to kill them. I quickly walked to the beside Shiloh. We were delivered $10 each when we entered the door. We separated the aisles. "We will meet again in the front after 30 minutes. I wasn't sure what I wanted to buy, so I started on the far right island. It was about makeup. I saw the tallest boy looking at the eyeliner. He was about 6 feet and 2 inches long, and he was very slender. His smooth brown hair was shaggy and hanging over his face, and his eyes were light blue. It will look beautiful with some black eyeliner. The long boy raised a pencil in front of him, and looked between me and the pen. "What?" I asked him. He looked at me as if I had said something funny. "Come here," he said, pointing with his fingers. I complied and bowed next to him. It smelled like cigarette smoke. He said, gently putting his hand under my chin and turning my head to face him. "Look at this direction. Close your eyes." I closed them. I heard his voice opening eyeliner. After that, I felt the pencil on my eyelids. Then, "What's your name?" the boy asked me. I said, "Darren." "Well, I'm Hayden," said Hayden. I said, "That was my ex-girlfriend's name." Quote. "Okay." Hayden said, "You can open your eyes." I did what he said, and I was surprised when I saw my face in the mirror. Hayden lowered the mirror. So, it was your ex-boyfriend Hayden's name, right? Are you dating anyone now? Okay. Not technically, I said. Hayden shrugged his shoulders. He stopped. I did the same. Where are you in? He asked. 17. Awesome. He said. Korean and I are in the 14th room. Korean. It's my roommate, Hayden explained. We still have a child with his bones curvature, and a man sits in the corner and mumbles to himself. He laughed. You will have to come visit me at some point, said Hayden, winking at him for some reason. Blonde. I told her, don't dye your hair. She looked at me and said, your hair is very beautiful and cannot be changed. She continued walking. I hate her. She muttered. She kissed the top of her head, inhaling her hair again. She turned to the unnatural hair colors. My hair, as you look at all these bright colors. Shiloh was standing behind me. She looked up at her face from my squat, and said, I can do whatever I want, I am an adult woman. She raised her eyebrows and said, my hair is really disfigured, and it is not as beautiful as yours. She smiled, then stood up to her. I said, I'm going to take a look at the place. Shiloh smiled sadly, and put her hands on her hips. Login. I browsed other lanes quickly, then went to the registry to pay for my purchases. I said to the employee, do you know what? Can you give me a pack of those cigarettes? The employee shrugged his shoulders, then turned to get the cigarettes out of their glass box. He turned around, then he continued to pay for my purchases. I put the bed on the table, then I walked to the front of the store. Shiloh, Hayden and the crazy girl were already there. Shiloh was carrying some cosmetics in her bag. Hayden had some cigarettes and a soft drink. The crazy girl was carrying a large stuffed whale. After a few minutes of waiting, the others came forward. Okay, it's time to leave. Mrs. Price, in front of us, came out of the door. We got to the car. This time I was halfway between Shiloh and Hayden. Okay, said Hayden, handing me a black eyeliner. I said to him, thank you. He smiled. I thought you looked beautiful in it. What happened? Hayden asked me, pointing at my bag. I showed him my hair color, the lighter, and the cigarette box. Are you a smoker? He asked me. I nodded. I was really lying. I have never smoked anything in my life. I just thought this is a habit that I can acquire. We went back to asylum, and then we all went back to our rooms. Help. Will you dye your hair now? Shiloh asked me. I think so. Shone on. An hour later, I was drying my hair and looking in Shiloh's mirror. I said, I look like a strawberry. Cute strawberry, said Shiloh, as she pulled her hands off my back and rested in my front pockets. Shiloh kissed me on my neck several times, then she curled my hair. Shiloh came close to me and bent down near my lips. She was about to kiss me, but suddenly I heard a knock at the door. The evil nurse who was in front of her entered. I went to the Ekber bed, then put him in the wheelchair she was carrying. Is a direction coming to you soon, Darren, the nurse said. She groaned when she left the room with Ikbari. Shiloh quickly kissed me on my lips, then I heard another way at the door. I'm Katya, said Katya, as she entered the room with a gloomy look on her face. Strawberry. She led me as a staircase on the stairs to the 3rd floor. We entered Dr. Hansen's room. Welcome, Darren, Dr. Hansen said when we entered the door. I must leave you here. I will come back soon. She muttered calmly, and looked anxious. That view was the quality that the mother might show. I hated her. Katya left the room and quietly closed the door. She turned to face Dr. Hansen again. He was smiling widely. Dr. Hansen took his eyes off me, then went to a small closet on the wall. I couldn't see clearly inside, but I saw bottles of different shapes and sizes. He extended his hand inward, removed several bottles of the Jan, and finally found what he was looking for. Dr. Hansen picked up a needle from a side table, and then approached me again. Planting the needle in the flask, then filling the needle with liquid. The poster on the flask was written in untidy handwriting, Salvia divinorum liquid. Now, I will give you this. He pointed to the needle in his hand. Then I will try to see if something we can do about psychosis and hallucinations, and then I have to lie on a metal check table. So, as you can imagine, you and my ankle. Undo the wrist. Dr. Hansen's keenness to tighten it. Light a medical light, then put the needle in my arms. We waited a few minutes. While I was looking at the ceiling, I noticed that it was starting to change color. The color of the wood changed from dark brown to a light pink shade. Then he started spinning with each rotation. A new color was added. These weren't like the other halices that the doctors told me I had. I would have said it wasn't real. Everything started to become cloudy and strange. I saw things that I could not even begin to describe. I didn't really know what was happening, but I saw a very blurry needle heading towards my left eye. At least, I think it was a needle. It was so deformed that it could have been a small snake, as far as I know. Everything was very strange. I didn't feel anything, but I felt a light belly in my head. A little voice in the back of my head told me that I was under the influence of drugs. I got to know the voice. It was Hunter's voice. Hunter hasn't been around for a long time. Whenever my friend appears, Hunter would usually be asked to kill someone. Fortunately, Hunter's voice was only this time. Whenever I actually saw him, it meant that there wasn't much time left before I had to kill someone. Hunter started talking to me for the first time when I was 8 years old. He appeared for the first time when I was 9 years old. He wanted me to kill the neighbor's dog. I didn't want to kill him, but I had to do it. After I killed the dog, Hunter left me. I decided to bury the dog, so I carried him to the woods behind my family farm. I cried all the way to the woods and back. That was when I started cutting my body for the first time. Hunter left me a mental note. He told me I had to cut my body until I felt better about the murder. And that's what I did. He didn't appear again until I was 14 years old. There was a boy who always annoyed me in high school. Then I killed him this time. I felt better about the murder. I deserved it. The last time Hunter appeared was 2 weeks ago. Then I killed my friend and father. I loved it. It won't be long before Hunter's appearance. Then I will have to kill someone else. I woke up. I was in a dream, relived the previous killings I had done. I was at the operating table. My eyes were beating, and Dr. Hansen was smiling at me. I'll untie me off the table, then help me to sit in the wheelchair. She appeared again in the entrance, and took me away from Dr. Hansen. My left eye still hurts, beating, and blurred vision. I broke my chains, then left quietly. I stumbled on my way to my bed, then lay down. I snapped myself and started swing back and forth. Having Hunter was always making me feel very nervous. Darren, are you okay? Shiloh asked me as she approached me and sat next to me on the bed. I put her warm hand on my back, and I sent a goosebump of happiness to my spine. I said, yes. Then I told her about Hunter. What about it? By the time I finished telling Shiloh about Hunter, I was crying. It wasn't that I did not enjoy the killing, I was only afraid that Hunter would make me kill Shiloh. She grabbed my head on her warm bosom, and wiped my hair while I was crying. Just being near her made me feel better. I didn't bother myself that night by changing my clothes. This time I was the one who needed Shiloh. She raised my head from her lap so that she could lie on the bed. Then I put my head back on the bed, and this time I put my head on her chest. My face became very red. I love you, she whispered. I kissed my head. I prayed to Allah that Hunter did not force me to kill Shiloh. I love her. I slept listening to Shiloh's heartbeat, thinking about my past. I know I shouldn't think about my past, because it always makes me depressed, but in fear of Hunter's return, I couldn't stop myself thinking. We woke up on strong knocks on the door. So he opened the door and entered the first nurse to whom I came. The nurse, who learned that she had kept the perfect picture of Mrs. Price in front of everyone who came to visit us, shouted to us, "Good, damn bitch." We sat down. "Darren, it's time to take some pills," she said, pointing to the wheelchair she had to the room. I rode the wheelchair politely, and tied me to it. This was a routine that I used to do a lot, even though I was only there for a few days. Shiloh sadly. I felt from her looks that I would regret anything. She looked at me. The huge nurse took me out of the room. I thought about how many nurses gained weight. It is strange that they try to help people be healthy. She walked up the stairs, and pulled me behind her. "Let's go down," she said, pushing me down the stairs. Since I couldn't use any of my limbs, there was no way to prevent myself from falling down the stairs. The wheelchair slipped and rolled on its side. I landed with a strong sound, shaking the whole house. "Oh my God, Josephine," Mrs. Bryce cried out to the living room, where I was lying on the floor, and the nurse Josephine slowly went down the stairs. Mrs. Bryce's hair was disheveled, and the lipstick was slender on her lips. A dark-haired man came out behind her, pulling a zipper. His pants, his poetry and general appearance were scattered. "What's wrong with you, my love?" The man spoke to Mrs. Price. "Go back to my office, Jerry, I'll come back soon." She winked and pushed him back in the direction from which he came. "Josephine," Mrs. Price cried out in a whisper. "Don't be so reckless. We don't want any of our visitors to doubt it now, right?" Josephine sighed, admitting defeat. She shook her head and lifted me off the ground. Josephine led me to her desk, muttering a series of obscene words directed at Mrs. Price. She broke my chains and sat me down at the small examination table. This table had a flat pillow with patches of different colors. Josephine took a small lamp, put a filter on it, and said, "Keep your eyes open," and shed a bright light in my eyes. "Oh," I cried, covering my eyes with my arm. My left eye was pulsing with pain again. I felt like someone poured salt into my eyes. "Shut up, son," the annoying nurse screamed at me. "Just shut up and let me finish checking you out." She used her forearm and pushed me down on the table. She did the usual checks. I checked my heart, lungs, nose and mouth. "You're fine, I think so. A little bit. Now, let's talk about the pills." She turned her back on me, and looked at my medication file. I watched her curiously browsing her closet. She muttered to herself, pulling different bottles. "Here's schizophrenia. One for bipolar disorder. One for psychosis and one for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder," she said, with 5 bottles of cereal. She asked me to go back to the chair, then we did the same routine. Tapes, rotation, steps, back to my room, unscrew the tapes. She looked at Shiloh, who was reading quietly on her bed, and then closed the door behind me. "They took Ekbari." That was all she said. I could say she was crying. "What's wrong?" I asked her as I went to her bed and then sat next to her. Seriously, I looked at her, and put her book side. "They will cook it. Tonight's dinner will be his." She was shocked. What?" I managed to stutter. Shiloh nodded her head, then started crying. I pulled my red hair out of my eyes, then I bent down to face it. Suddenly, she grabbed me from the back of my neck, and pressed her lips hard on my lips. We kissed with passion for several minutes. We only stopped kissing when I sat on top of it. "I don't want to have sex," I said. I was sitting, and Shiloh rubbed her hands on my waist. "It's okay, Darren," she smiled, and reassured me that it was fine for her. She also sat down. "What's wrong with your eyes?" she said, staring deeply into the left eye, the eye on which the doctor underwent some surgery. "What, Logan?" I asked. "Your left eye is different from the right." She stopped talking, and she still looked into my eyes. She walked away from me and took the small mirror from the side table. I looked at myself in the mirror while Shiloh was carrying her in front of me, and I examined the eye in question. Shiloh was right. The color of my left eye has turned light brown to pale gray. She grabbed my cheek in her hands, and she stared at F. "What did they do to you?" She looked at me, looking for an answer in my eyes. Drive Hansen. He wanted to look in my head to see if he could find out why I had my psychosis. She kept staring at me. Hunter started talking to me when I was under the influence of drugs. She and I stayed like this for a few minutes. In the end, Shiloh fell into tears. I cried on my shoulder, which led to the darkening of my gray shirt. "I hate living here. I want to go out. I want to get away from my mom. I don't want to see more people die." Shiloh was trembling in my body. She did the only thing I could think of to calm her down. She gently rubbed her back and kissed her head. "We will get out of here someday. I promise." We interrupted the dinner bell. It wasn't too late for dinner, but I think Ikbari cooked dinner quickly. We got out of bed hesitantly and headed to the dining hall. We only had one meal a day, but no matter how hungry I felt, I knew I wouldn't eat anything. After we sat straight, She approached us as a trend. Shiloh. Darren, I wanted to tell you that in light of the recent events, you will have a new homemate. We both looked at it, then at each other. Who? Shiloh speaks first. Hayden. She looked at the ground before she suddenly left. There was not much talk during dinner. Surely there was screaming and crying, but there wasn't much talk. Shiloh and I barely ate our food. After removing the trays from the table, I slowly walked them to our room. Hayden was already sitting on an Ekpara bed when we got back. There were only a few small belongings placed on the side table. Hayden looked at us when we entered. Oh, he said indifferent. Long time to see. She and I sat down to our families. So, Hayden started. Tell me about yourselves. I want to know my new colleagues in the residence. I'm Shiloh, said Shiloh. I'm 17 years old, and my mom is the bitch who put me here. She is the one who runs this hellish place. Hayden frowned. Cruel. He looked at me. We stared at each other. You, he said after a few moments of silence. I killed some people. I bribed my aunt the judge to make me stay here, instead of going to solitary confinement in prison. I frown when I remember this memory. Then I keep telling him my story. With very much decoration, I cut my father's throat, and cut off their limbs. Then I tied the rope around the pieces, then hung it in the ceiling. I was proud. I drove to my friend's house, then stabbed her in her heart after I deceived her and deluded her that I wanted to kiss her for the first time. It took 1 minute for her to bleed to death. She smiled when she slowly lost her life. Samantha was not satisfied with me, so she betrayed me twice. I cut her heart, then pressed it in my hand. Blood and muscles overflowed around my skin. Finally, I decided to go to my aunt's house. I stabbed her, but she didn't die. She called the police and arrested me. Before they came, I took my knife and engraved the word, bad, on my arm. I wrote this word on my arm because I failed to kill someone. 4 days later, we were in court. I found out that my aunt sprayed the judge to send me to a mental sanatorium. She didn't want the rest of my family to think I was just an idiot. I told them I was crazy because of the way my parents raised me. And so I ended up here. How about you? Hayden asked out of curiosity why he was here, and he smiled. Well, my father left me when I was 5, so there was no one but me, my brothers and my mom. I was in the middle, so I didn't get much attention from anyone. And to Shiloh with my sadness, he looked at me. My mom didn't care about me until I acted inappropriately. When I was doing it, she was hitting me with a whip. I never had any siblings. My parents were usually good, so I couldn't deal with Hayden as much as I wanted. My mom thought something was wrong with me, so, in the end, after she was so angry that she was dealing with me, she put me in the attic. She left me there for a few weeks. She gave me only a little water and bread once a day. He looked at his wrists. I cut myself off, hoping to bleed, or my mom would take me from there. When turning to the inside of his wrists towards Shiloh, I saw a huge scar on both sides of his arm. His scars were vertical, unlike the common horizontal wounds that spread on my wrists. Hayden continued, from sending this hateful woman to a mental sanatorium, they thought of me to the hospital. And when my mother found me, she took me, despite the doctors, that my cutting of my body was just a trick to attract attention. He laughed at the idea, as if he found it entertaining. A psychiatrist came to visit me at the hospital, and asked me some questions, and came to the conclusion that I had narcissistic personality disorder, hysteria, and had borderline personality disorder. This is why I am here to stay in this hellish place run by the devil's wife. He paused for a moment, remembering something, and then said, I don't want to offend you, Shiloh. But your mother is a bit harsh. He made Hayden Shiloh's last comment smile for the first time in a while. At least since the last time I accepted her. I hate mom, Shiloh said. The mother is the same way she says, bugger. It's a bigger pairing, she said, and she was knocking on the door, and she entered as a trend. It is concerned. A voice in my head told me it was Hunter again. No, 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 no. I cried and grabbed my head. Katya was nice. At least Hunter didn't want me to kill Shiloh. She looked at me, and Shiloh and Hayden were curious. A short silence prevailed while everyone exchanged embarrassing looks. Cue Shiloh, she said as a direction, finally, then rolled the wheelchair to Shiloh's bed. I'm sorry, dear. She helped as Shiloh's direction to sit in the chair. She rushed towards Shiloh, and printed a kiss on her lips. Be careful, I said. I whispered in her ear. After Shiloh and Katji came out of the room, Hayden and I started staring at each other. I'm going to take a quick shower, I said when I suddenly stood up. I walked in the hallway to the small bathroom. After I closed the door, I took off my clothes. Then I opened the shower to a reasonable temperature, and then entered. This was my first shower since I came here. I was feeling great because I wasn't so lame. I didn't know we could use the shower ourselves until Shiloh told me. There was a bar of soap, but since I have germ phobia, I used shampoo to wash my body with foam. I looked at my body, and realized how thin I am. I also thought about how close I was to make love. I finished washing my body and hair, then I dried myself with a towel. It was like a trend that brought us new clothes when she came to bring Shiloh. I didn't bother wearing my dirty clothes, because my room was just a few feet from the bathroom. I wore my underwear, because I had no other husband. This was the only thing they only gave us once a week, Shiloh said. I entered room number 17. I picked up the little pile of clothes from my bed. While I was about to wear my shirt, my hand stopped me on my waist. I felt annoyed, then I turned my head to see Hayden smiling at me. I was thinking of you while you were in the bathroom, Hayden said, kissing my neck, and he sent a goosebumps to my bare back. What are you doing, Hayden? I asked. Since I saw you, Darren, I knew I wanted to own you. Log in, get close to me, then move his hands to the front side of the lane. I thought about Shiloh, but, what about Shiloh? She stopped talking. Hayden walked towards me, took a pile of clothes from my hand, and then put it on the table next to me. I really love you, Darren, Hayden said as he slowly approached me with every syllable. Finally, his body pressed my body, and put one hand on my bare back and the other on the back of my neck. I didn't know how to react to this sexual advancement from Hayden, so I stood still. Hayden pressed his lips on my lips, and pulled me by the hair until my beard rose. Then he increased the depth of the Qibla. I accepted it in turn. Not because I feel feelings for him, but because there was nothing else I could think of. Soon, Hayden and I lay on my bed. His hands were completely above me. He took my hand in his hands, then put them under his shirt. Then he raised my hand to the top of his back, then took off his shirt. Suddenly Hayden stopped, and put his body straight on my body, and said in a whisper, "It's good to be able to get a little movement." He stopped to suck my neck. Korean will never let me do this for him. He came back to kiss me hard. Are you ready? He asked among the kisses. Data, I said it embarrassed, and suddenly he sat on my chest. Oh, you're not fun. He pretended to be angry. Sign in, okay, he said, leaning forward again. Maybe at the right time. He smiled sarcastically, then put a quick kiss on my lips before he jumped out of my bed. I kept lying on my bed, reconciling everything that happened. Hayden was wearing his shirt again, so when I realized I was almost naked I got up and put on my pants. While I was wearing my shirt, I walked in as a direction and they took him to the room. She was wiped out to Shiloh to get off her wheelchair, and she left as the direction of the room again. Why were you just wearing your shirt? She asked Shiloh, raising her eyebrows with suspicion. I just finished taking a shower. I said that while thinking about what Hayden and I had just been doing. I felt guilty. He did not like this answer, Shiloh. But your hair is dry. I raised my hand and touched my hair. It was dry. I waited a little while for a change. I could say she didn't fully believe me, but she didn't put pressure on me on this issue. Our heads turned towards the door, and Josephine entered. I'm back again, Darren. Approaching. The unjust had now been resolved. Josephine put me in a wheelchair, and went up to the third floor. When I thought about what happened with Hayden, I felt bad. I felt defiled. I felt like, by God's order, I had over-limited. Kill him too. I think I don't mind killing Hayden, Hunter said in my mind. The nurse untied the wheelchair from me and left. I was in Dr. Zenith's room. In order to make you more delicious, the doctor said, we will have to detoxify you. He turned around in front of a small table with a stove with a penine and various fluid bowls scattered around. The ugly old man smiled at me, a smile that reminded me of a rotting corpse with two lips. Then moved the liquid on the stove of Benson, then turned it off. He's ready. I saw him pour the transparent liquid into a long cup. Drink this, he said, extending his arm towards me. I grabbed the cup with both hands, and then inhaled the strange mixture. Your system will be scanned. He extended his hand to a bucket and then put it in front of me. My body cleaning actually seemed very good, given what I did. I can take advantage of that. I drank the scent of wood slowly. I felt a burning sensation when I entered my throat. I was able to swallow all the drink when I felt the smell of the drink coming back to my throat. To the bucket that was in front of me, and it goes without saying I was thankful. Dr. Zenith examined me several times before the nurse came back to take me. Then we went back to my room. Shiloh is gone again. She assumed she was taking a shower this time, and she was not undergoing painful surgery. Can you never do the same thing you've done with me again? I asked while sitting on my bed. Do what? Hayden asked. Does it satisfy you? On his bed, bare my chest, I looked at him as he was pulled out. Yes, I didn't like it. I love Shiloh. I love girls. Register login laughter Hayden. It looked like you loved me when we were kissing earlier. I shivered, and slapped myself with my mind. Well, I don't like you that way. I said. In fact, I hardly love you at all. To change that, I hurt his feelings, but I didn't care. He made me feel uncomfortable, and he was over. So, he said, I'll be grateful if you don't do it again, that's it. I lay on my bed, trying to console myself. All right, Hayden sighed, then turned on his side and turned away from me. Shiloh returned to the room, only wearing a towel. She smiled at me, turning around and wearing her clothes. Even though we just met, I felt related to it. I think I thought it would be the only person I would be stuck with. At least as long as we are in this hell. Shiloh turned off the lights, then crawled to bed with me. I love you, she said. She caressed me. She kissed her cheek in response. I started crying, not because of sadness, but because of confusion, guilt, self-hating, and fear of the future. I quietly whispered what Hayden and I did. She didn't talk to me, and suddenly she felt trembling, and thought she was crying now. Log in, I gave a soft laugh. Yes, she whispered in my ear. Hayden is a bit of a bitch. But I'm not angry. You're so cute, and I know you're finding it hard to say no. I stopped. Okay, she said, smiling at me. I didn't want to do anything dirty. I just wanted to see your beautiful body. She still loved her, kissed her head and then fell asleep. Ultimately, dealing with so many people, especially in emotional matters, is very stressful for humans. All apologies. Been a week since Hayden moved to our room. Hunter appeared yesterday. I was walking a few feet from the bathroom to my room when I saw it. It disappears behind the corner. I often ignore such things, but I knew it was Hunter. This is how it appeared the first time I saw it. As I followed the shadows in the aisle, I reached a single door in one of the corners of the corridor, and I opened the door. It will be less when I slowly run the door handle to the strange room. I heard it was night, so I knew the chances of a squeak were hidden when I opened the door. I put my hand in the hole, looking for the light switch. When I turned it on, the bright light blinded me for a moment. As soon as my eyes got fixed, I saw that there were many mummified animals scattered on the walls. There was an ugly carpet on the floor. It was different from the rest of the house where it was dark wood. At the back of the room, there was a desk with papers that were hurried in piles. You're here, Darren, Hunter said, standing from a partially hidden chair. I thought you would love it here. I looked at the walls where there were no animal heads, he said, smilingly. There were rows and rows of books. Not just ordinary books, but old thick books. It's okay. I suppressed my enthusiasm. Why are you here? I asked him and I already know the answer, and he smiled more. You know why I'm here, Darren. I'm here because there are more people who don't have to be around you. I frown when I hear his words. You want me to kill Hayden. That's fine, but Katya, she's cute. I don't want to kill her. I begged for Hunter, who remained in motion. As a trend that takes you to those bad excuses for doctors, almost every day. It leads you to evil. Hunter was feeling nervous, and I realized it meant I would have to kill at least one of them soon. All right, I said. I was trying to formulate a plan to kill as a trend. He calmed down and walked towards me and put his hand on my shoulder. He knew I hated it. She shivered at the touch, retreated and turned to leave. Oh, Hunter said, I am waiting for you. I will bring Katya here tomorrow. I will tell her the price she will pay for her work as a delivery girl. Hunter quickly left in the room and went back to my room. My hair was swollen by showering. I was worried that Hunter would start appearing frequently. This means I will have to start killing more. It was only a matter of time before he was jealous of Shiloh and made me kill her. It's dinner time. Hayden and I went to the dining room. None of us touched the meat as usual. We were all as quiet as usual, as there was not much to say anyway. I decided a way to kill Katya. To my room. I didn't want Shiloh or Hayden to know that I had not put the plastic knife in my back pocket, and I stood up and went back feeding all the guests. She wasn't like there. The nurses were the most vulnerable. I did, so I left early. I told her I wanted to talk to her during dinner time, and she was waiting for me in my room. Darren, she asked me curiously when I entered the room. Can we go to a more private place? I asked, looking as innocent as I could. She nodded, and followed me as I was returning to the room. I led her to the place I had just found the night before. After she turned on the light, she made her come in before me. I closed the door behind us. I looked around the room anxiously. I went to the bookcases and passed my fingers on the back of the books I used so often. What did I want to talk about, Darren? Katya stammered. I just wanted to know exactly how I would be able to please Shiloh. Her eyes were wide, looking at me. We don't encourage this kind of behavior here. I stopped talking. He turned to confront her. Well, I don't think this is upset. In the end, Mrs. Price doesn't behave with a different man every night. I stopped to influence. To hear her and her man downstairs at the basement, I can hear the sick moaning and screaming, but I can also. I went back to the books, and found a book that was very cold. I also saw a small glass ball on the desk. I pretended that I stumbled in the office and rolled the ball towards a direction. When she bent down, she took the opportunity to take her head and hit her head a few times until she fell to the ground, unconscious. Good job, Darren. Now I finished the job, Hunter said. Now I'm done. I was feeling satisfied with the murder again, like a smoker who has stopped smoking for a long time. I changed it, on either side of her mouth, which made it look like she had a giant smile. I looked around the room. There was a closet that was somewhat hidden behind a curtain. I thought this would be the perfect place. As usual, Hunter refused to help me carry Katya to the closet, so I left her pregnancy alone. Numerous corpses, dressed in a thrift store, stacked on the cabinet floor. The bodies were carrying wounds and bruises. Some of them were strangled, some of them were even death, and some seemed to be just children born with a terrible flaw. No matter how they died, I tried to ignore it and throw it inside. When her body landed over the other bodies, the pile of flesh and bones moved. She revealed a small body that I knew very well. It was Ekbari. I had to say no better to the corpse. While I was doing this, a cool breeze blew. I realized that this closet was basically a refrigerator. She closed the door quickly, and Larry turned around that Hunter had gone. She left the room as quickly as possible. I quietly entered my room. Hayden is gone, so I won't be able to kill him now. Shiloh was reading another book silently on her bed after a few seconds, and she looked astonished as usual. I stood and walked towards me. I closed the door behind me when I entered, and I realized, when I entered the room. She put her book sideways and looked at me as it was a good thing. She left her arms around my shoulder and led us to my bed. This time, she lay on top of me. We eagerly exchanged kisses for several minutes, as if it were though. The door handle shook, and Shiloh got up from above me. I sat down while one of the nurses I didn't know pushed Hayden into the room. The nurse indifference helped him get to his bed. It didn't look good. His skin was yellowish, and his eyes were dark. It was a drastic change from the relative boy I saw the last time I saw dinner. Hayden, I asked, what's the matter? What did they do to you? I'm fine. I just need rest. Maybe I won't have to kill him, and the doctors may take care of him, said Hayden, lying on his bed. I decided to leave him alone. Shiloh went back to bed to read a book, and she told me she had already read it several times. Because the number of books in the house is limited, due to the lack of readers who are able to read, I have read all the books at least once. But that was her favorite book, The Invisible Man, by H.G. Wells. I hugged my knees to my chest and hugged them tightly. I realized that although I quickly washed my hands of blood, I still missed a lot. My clothes were all black, so, fortunately, blood did not appear. Although I wasn't sure that Shiloh saw the blood on my hands or not, I thought she would understand. She always understands me, even though all the tests say I'm not feeling well. She's the one I want to stay with for the rest of my life. I got up from bed, then quickly walked to the bathroom. I rubbed my hands and nails, and tried to clean as best I could. I heard a knock on the door. Darren, it was Shiloh. Go in, I said. I opened the door for her to enter. Oh, I sat on the side of the small bathtub. I have something to tell you. I was nervous about my door. What's wrong? I asked, and I am automatically anxious. My mother wants to get more people here. Shiloh looked at the ground. But, isn't there really a lot of people here? I thought about how many people were there when we entered the dining hall. There were already a lot of people. She shook her head. She wants more money. And more people means more money. Her words resounded in my mind. I hate most people. In fact, I couldn't even be around them. I couldn't speak. It was like knowing that my parents had been born. I started shivering. I can't stand people. I said. I was sitting next to Shiloh, and I threw my head on her lap, and looked at her. I know myself too, she said, wiping my hair. Tomorrow, they will start moving more people. I sighed. They will try to put the same people in every room. This means that our room will be more crowded. How about all these children with birth defects? I didn't actually see many other rooms in the house, but I assumed it was similar to our room. My mother buys more cradle to put in the rooms. Something wet fell on my face. It was a tear of Shiloh. These poor children will never be able to get out of there. They will not even be taken to the bathroom. This didn't sound well, but I hated kids. But maybe their parents did something worth it. I sat down. This time, it was Shiloh's turn to lie in my lap. She was crying, as I assumed, because of her mother. She patted her soft hair and let her cry until she shed tears. A few minutes later I stopped crying. Can I tell you something? I asked. Shiloh raised her head and nodded her head. You have to promise me that you won't get angry. I promise, Darren, I will never be angry with you. I love you. She kissed her forehead. I killed Katya. Shiloh sat down quickly. What? I didn't think you would do what Hunter said. I didn't want him to ask me to kill you. It was on. She hugged me. It's okay. I'm not angry with you. I just feel sad. She raised her head and kissed her lips, trying to relax her. Then I drowned in my arms while we were eagerly exchanging. We stayed like this for a few minutes, and finally broke up. We have to get some sleep. I need to kill Hayden, said Shiloh, sitting upright. But I could say she understood. She and I got up, and then went back to our room. But we couldn't enter the room. There were many. Someone pushes the thin beds into the room. Can you help us? The only nurse in the small group asked us. We moved forward and pushed the beds into the room. I looked around and saw that the little room was full of 5 other beds. I saw a Korean, the little boy with blue eyes and blonde hair, and the crazy girl. I soon knew her name was Angie, 30-year-old, someone I didn't know. Her eyes were as brown as the eyes of the person I didn't know was a young girl. Maybe she was 12 years old. To walk, Shiloh and I had to make a kind of quick jump to get to our beds that were now in the back of the room. Our small collection of belongings was taken to our bed, where our night tables were removed to save more space. I collected my things and put them under my bed. I had only 2 books, a notebook, a pen, an extra pair of clothes and black eyeliner that Hayden bought for me. I kept the entire collections of Edgar Allan Poe's books. As I flipped the pages, I finally found my favorite story, The Oval Image. I read my book silently while everyone was arranging their things as best they could. They were chatting quietly. I could hear some parts of talking through the thick wall of the world I was living in while reading. Most of the names I heard were Corey, Sally, and Angie, Hayden, Shiloh, Andrew, the little boy, and Carter, the older man. Darren. I looked up. Waha. Realized that Shiloh he was trying to get my attention. We introduce ourselves, and why we were put here. I sighed, bent the corner of the page, and then put the book one side. I'm Darren, and I killed my father and my girlfriend, but the judge considered me crazy. So, I have schizophrenia, slight schizophrenia, psychosis, Asperger's syndrome, and obsessive-compulsive disorder. That's why, Angie said, smiling at me with a wide smile. Get your mouth, Angie. Carter said, you're just saying that because you think you're cool. What do you guys have? I asked quietly, and nod my head to include everyone. Carter OL spoke. I'm Carter, and my mother couldn't take care of me, so she sent me here. I have bipolar disorder and anger problems. Andrew said, I'm Andrew. I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. He mispronounced schizophrenia, but I assumed it was because he was a child. He seemed to be in only the 7th schizophrenia. Sally had nothing wrong, except for narcissism and severe depression. Angie, on the other hand, was suffering from schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, border disorders, and any other typical, crazy, disorder. I finally spoke to Korean. I'm Korean. I'm very depressed, and I killed my father. They were stupid and deserved to die. I could have asserted that I would better agree with him. It was quiet, and I could sympathize with him. I won't kill him. After a few more minutes of speaking, I decided to go back to the book. I fall asleep better when there's a little background noise, so I didn't realize I slept. The arrivals. I woke up in the middle of the night sweating, and the nightmares began to haunt me constantly. Now it's time, Darren. Hunter spoke from somewhere in the shadows. Getting to Hayden's bed without awakening others. Somehow I managed to get over the room. The room was very crowded, so it was difficult for Hayden to speak only in a drowsy voice here and there. I grabbed the pillow from my bed. I stood over Hayden. I held my breath and looked at him. He opened his eyes. Tell me. Darren, speak sluggishly. I can't stand looking at him anymore. Pictures of what he did to me appeared before my eyes. I had an overwhelming feeling of anger. I put the pillow in my hand, and I put it over Hayden's head. I stayed there for a few minutes until I was sure of his death. After I removed the pillow from his face, I put my ears on his chest. There was no heartbeat or air moving in his lungs. That's what you get, you idiot, you idiot. She whispered in his ear, which became deaf, and then put a kiss on his cheek. In my mind, I think this was a kind of death kiss, so to speak. All I know is that killing makes me feel better. I think old habits don't die easily. I went back to my bed with caution, and made sure not to collide with any other bed. I decided not to go to bed in my bed, so I sneaked into Shiloh's bed. I lay next to her. I thought about how long it looked like I had spent here, but in fact, it wasn't a little more than a month ago. My mind eventually came back to deep sleep. I did what Hunter wanted, so now I can rest. At least for a short time. The noisy morning bell buzzed around the house, so everyone in the room woke up at the same time. Suddenly, I heard a loud cry over the bell. She was Sally. Hayden is already dead, she continued to groan, and her screams caused panic among the residents of the room. One of the nurses seems to have heard Sally screaming, but she couldn't. The nurse rushed to the room to see what had happened, and then looked at the body of Hayden, who was not alive. An hour later, Hayden was taken to the basement so that the paramedics could move him. And Mrs. Price went up to the crowded room. Now, she started talking very slowly, as if she was talking to a stupid child. I will ask each of you some questions that you will answer honestly. Otherwise, no one has bothered to ask the vulgar question, otherwise, what? Mrs. Price was staring at each of us in turn. We'll start with you. Carter grabbed his bed and took him out to the hall. 10 minutes passed, and Mrs. Price returned with Carter, who was now suffering from several bruises on his arms. I was a girl. She pointed to Sally and came back quickly. This style continued until she asked me to wake up. She drove me to the small office room where she was recently killed. She smiled sarcastically as soon as he thought about it. The plastic knife cut her skin much easier than I expected. Mrs. Price must have thought that I would smile at her sarcastically, because when we sat down, she said, "Well, Darren, you should know that I usually do nothing with the sick." I felt shivering inside, trying not to vomit. I would have preferred to do things with Hayden any day on Mrs. Price. She was not only a rude, but she was also my friend's unofficial mother. She stood up, and then approached me. Then I bent down and spoke in my ear. "Although I may be able to make an exception for you, I didn't like that she was so close to me. Actually, I didn't like it at all. So I did the only thing that came to my mind. I pretended to be very sneeze." Mrs. Price immediately retreated. "Disgusting," I screamed. "You're a disgusting kid." I grabbed my throat and pulled me out of the room, then went up the stairs. We stopped in front of a door that I had never entered before. She opened it and pushed me hard to the small cabinet. I saw her closing the door, and then I heard the door lock. I assumed she went down the stairs, because I heard her high-heeled shoes as he walked away with every step. My eyes quickly adapted to the darkness of the small room. There were large nails, and everything sharp and dangerous that you could think of, stands out from the walls and the door. I could have felt the different sharp objects, penetrating different places of my body. The weapons were placed in such a way that they could not avoid a deep scratch. I stood as still as I could, because I did not want to hurt myself more. I was relieved because I was as I am now, because the overweight person will be in a very unfavorable situation. I felt like hours had passed, but maybe it was just a few minutes. I listened with great interest to see if I could hear anyone. There was nothing. There wasn't even anyone being beaten up. Was this a punishment everyone faced? Or was it just a difficult time that Mrs. Price thought of her troubled mind? I started to feel cold, as I didn't have time to change my clothes to real clothes. I was just wearing my underwear. This leaves more skin exposed in front of the sharp objects on the walls of this deadly closet. There was no way I could move without being stabbed, but I took the risk. I felt my hand at the door in front of me, trying to find the doorknob. I felt my feet under the door trying to find a piece of just waiting for Mrs. Price, or personal wood not covered with dangerous things. And soon I found out that this is useless. It was another, to open the door. An hour has passed, and my legs are starting to stick. I thought I heard sounds outside, but I couldn't make sure. I decided to listen. I can't find a direction. Female voice speaks. Maybe that girl was just missing out on work. I hated working here. The second voice was Mrs. Price. I waited until they ended the conversation. No one knew that I had killed Katya. It was better that way. I heard a snarling sound, and suddenly, the lights blinded me. It was Mrs. Price, who finally allowed me to leave. "Go back to your room, boy. I trust you got the time to think about what you've done." She almost killed me by pushing me towards the grades. I slipped on some steps, but I didn't drop. That is, the payment did not make me drop. I fell on my face or down the stairs because my legs haven't been used for a long time. Mrs. Price made a low laugh when she fell. "You deserve it, little bit of shit." I got up from the ground, and then ran to my room. Everyone was staring at me when I entered, and blood was shed from the many wounds on my body. Shiloh ran towards me. "No, you didn't, did you?" I nodded, assuming we were talking about the hell wardrobe. "Come with me," she said, carefully holding my wrist, and then driving me out of the room. Cabinet. "Come with me," Shiloh said, gently holding my wrist and then pulling me out of the bedroom. She led us to the bathroom through the hallway. Shiloh closed the door behind her and turned to confront me. "Darren," her eyes filled with pity. "I'm so sorry for what my mother did to you. I can't believe her." She stopped and then thought about what she said. "Wait, I can't believe she did this." Shiloh was clearly nervous. I put my hand on the back of her neck, then turned my head until it was on the same level as her head. She sighed and smiled. "How even if you're hurt and in so much pain, you're still trying to make others happy?" "Because it doesn't hurt," I cried, the pain as the scratches in my face widened. "Darren, I know you're in pain. You should not be strong. I just expressed your feelings and pain." I stood on her toes and kissed my cracked lips gently. Everything went through, and while my tears fell, I felt as if every drop of a tear was made of acid every time it fell on my bloodstained chest. We need to clean you. She took out a small cloth and then opened the bathtub faucet. I was still crying, thinking everything was wrong. It hurts me every scratch. I put the soap on the laundry towel, then I started cleaning my body. I grabbed my knees to my chest, while I was still crying. Soon the water in the bathtub blended with blood. I love you so much. She groaned, with tears of sadness and pain. From here, Darren, I can't stand staying here. We have to get out of here. She was crying more than me. She understood her feelings. She spent nearly 10 years here. She deserved to be free. The world is ugly, but that place is hell. She raised her head to face my head. As I said, I promise I will do everything in my power to make sure we get out of here, somehow. This made her cry more. I'm getting some clothes and bandages. I stared sadly. I cleaned your wounds, but they are really deep. I nodded. I understood that she needed to go. I even cleaned the bathtub from any remaining blood. She came back 10 minutes later, holding a lot of things in her hand. I would close my eyes when she changed. I got dressed quickly. I can help you put these bandages on you. I started lifting my shirt when I heard impatient knocking on the door. The world is ugly. Open. I ask you to. It was Mrs. Price who knocked on the door. Shiloh pushed me to the very small cabinet, and then opened the door her pain. Yes, I heard Shiloh say, I need to take a shower, so get out. Yes, Mom, let me give it to you. She was able to say that Shiloh was doing her best to tear her mother's head. Okay, but do it quickly. I'm waiting for you. Shiloh quickly opened the cabinet door and took some towels. I don't think Mrs. Price saw me, or at least gave me no indication. The door was closed, and then I heard a sound when I opened the water. 1 minute later, when I assumed the water was warm enough, Mrs. Price kicked Shiloh out of the room and closed the door. Oh shit, I thought. I realized I would have to stay in a closet while Mrs. Price, who may have looked attractive at some point, is now older and has a disgusting character. I did my best to not vomit when I heard her take off her clothes. I closed my eyes tightly as I prayed silently. I prayed that I could somehow be able to disappear. The sound of running water filled my ears for some time, but it quickly turned into a distant whistling. A feeling of buzzing in my head when I started to see black spots in my eyes. There was no sound when I lost consciousness because there was no way to move or fall. There was a ringing in my ears and tingling in my arms and legs. Suddenly, a bright light appeared. I could only see a shadow in the bright light, but I felt there were people around me. It was a strange feeling for my minority, and an eye of appreciation was opened. But at the same time, it was a kind of rest. I found myself again in the small closet in the Hell's bathroom. As soon as I had this feeling, it disappeared. I opened an eye. I must have been out for a few minutes, because when I regained consciousness, I had not heard any movement from the door. I just tried to stay as calm as possible if Mrs. Price was out of the door. I waited for at least an hour until I heard a knock on the cabinet door. Darren, it was Shiloh. I just left my mom. I came to take you. Login register opened the door. I'm sorry that I had to leave you there for a long time. Are you okay? I decided not to tell her about my outside the body experience right now. I'm fine, I think. I said I was getting out of the tight closet. Once I left, Shiloh hugged me. I wrapped my wrap around her arm around her. I'm really tired. I said I still enjoyed her embrace. I think it's almost time to visit a doctor. Shiloh said hesitantly. I groaned. It's been a long time since I had to see any of the doctors, and I wasn't happy. We approached our room, and one of the nurses came close to her. She was carrying a moving chair, and she looked very tired, eagerly watching some of the other patients sitting in the hall. I was in the chair, she sat on the chair, and the nurse quickly tied me up. Well, Darren, it's been a long time, sure. I didn't say it with an answer. Today we'll work on your back. Log in. I've been locked out and I stood up. It wasn't usual for him to be so polite, especially with me. I did what he told me. The table was cold under my skin, but it was nice on my face. We heard a sound when Dr. Zenith put on his rubber gloves. He searched for a metal tool. When he found a suitable tool, he came back to me. "So I'm sure you can handle it," he said. "I'm feeling sharp pain in my lower back." I tried not to scream in pain as the doctor slowly cut my spine. My teeth were snoring together when I felt it cutting my back, which led to a flap of meat on both sides. It was too much. I lost my consciousness again, for the second time today. My bed was a comfortable feeling compared to the metal table I was sitting on. "Darren," she was Sally. "Are you awake?" My body. I decided to stay still. "Yes, I am awake." "Where are everyone?" "At dinner," the little girl replied. "I must have been out for a long time." "Why are you here?" "Shiloh was watching you for a while until I came back," she said. "Thank you, Sally," she muttered. It was very difficult, painful and cold for me to keep getting up, so I quickly went back to sleep. There was a soft touch on my cheek, which woke me up from a mysterious dream. I opened my eyes. "How fun, Darren, how do you feel?" he asked Shiloh as he bent down near my face. I groaned what I thought would be an appropriate answer. "Is that bad?" she asked me. I nodded. I gently sat on the bed next to me, gently scrubbed my blonde hair. "Tomorrow we will be able to leave for a short time. Do you think you will be able to?" Shiloh asked. "Get out of here. It's been a long time since any of us got fresh air, I think." I remembered the nostalgic times before I entered this hell, before I met Hunter. In the end, it was all his mistake, wasn't it? I held Shiloh's hand with my hand weakly. I realized how cold I was feeling. I was about to have a fever. "Awesome." Shiloh moved down on the bed so she could lie next to me. I approached her, welcoming warmth. Her hand touched my forehead gently. "Your hands are frozen, but your head is burning." "No, it's not. It's just warm." I looked at her a bit tidy. Shiloh just laughed at me. "I love you, Darren." Sharp wrapped my arm around her waist, the most suitable place for my hand. She laughed again. It took me a moment to realize why she was laughing. I didn't think it was her waist. When I realized what I did, "I'm so sorry," I said, removing my hand. "It's okay," she smiled. "There will be more time for that once we get married." In my lungs I am married. I was in a state of panic. I loved Shiloh, but I never imagined that we would really succeed in getting out of here. It attracts me, but I think that's every girl's dream, even if she's crazy. "Darren, you are very calm. Are you awake?" Shiloh's anxious voice came to my ears. I heard her, but I pretended to sleep. "Darren," she paused and raised her head to look at me. "This isn't the way you breathe when you're really asleep." I slowly opened my eyes to look at her, wondering how she could know how I breathed, especially when she had always fallen asleep before me. "Sleep." Shiloh turned from an angry face to a happy face. She turned her head back and sighed. After 15 minutes of sleep, everyone entered the room. "Where were you guys?" "We all left. We thought you both wanted to be alone, so we didn't come to take you both." He looked around hesitantly, as if he thought we might hurt him. "Thank you." I smiled at them as she sat down quickly. Everyone sat on their beds and chatted no longer. Since I was still unable to move, I lay on my bed, listening to the conversation, until I was bored. My bet is to bring a daunting task book, and in the end, after a few minutes of trying, Sally extended her hand and brought the book to me. "Why don't you go and talk to Carter or something? I want to spend some time with Darren." Shiloh, who was on her bed, crawled towards me. I pushed the little Sally away from me. "Do you want me to help you sit down?" "Oh, sure, but you were kind of a bad thing with Sale. You cut me off by kissing my lips." I was astonished for the moment when I started helping me to sit in, if you could call it. "Shiloh," and I said I was going to bed alone because my back hurts so much. It was a lie, but I didn't want to sleep with her tonight. What happened to Shiloh? Attached to me, I don't like the things that stick to me. After about 17 hours, Shiloh and I, accompanied by others, returned to Mrs. Price. Our trip was relatively quiet. Except to buy some things, I did nothing interesting. I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, drying my hair after the shower I needed. It's time to reveal my new hair color again. There was not much excitement when I took off my temporary turban, but it was worth the wait. My hair covered my hair as I tried to see my hair, which was previously poured out, and it has now turned black. I think I liked black hair more than dyed or blonde hair. My hair was naturally dark, so it wasn't hard to get used to black. I quickly put on my clothes and then rushed through the hallway into the crowded bedroom. Only a few people were left in the room when I entered. I heard a squeak screeching behind my back. She might have been one of the nurses. But yes, as she expected, the nurse was pushing Sally in her wheelchair. She helped Sally get out of the chair, and then pointed out that this routine was fairly programmed inside me. Shiloh asked Shiloh and some older patients, Sally quietly, if she was fine. Fortunately, she was fine this time. As we were going up the stairs, I couldn't help but wonder where some others were. They seemed to go up and disappear. I had the feeling that they might become a nearby dinner. Please use the anesthetic. There is no time to evade. Dr. Hansen spoke as soon as we entered his room. The nurse did not hesitate to remove the cuffs and forced me to sit at the surgery table. While I was lying in complete astonishment, I had a dream, the first dream I've seen in a long time. I dreamed of the conscience of the absent. I saw myself sitting next to Shiloh on a garden bench. We were talking about a goal when something happened. Something really bad, but I couldn't remember him after I woke up. I was lying on my bed without a shirt. I tried hard to look at my chest, but I almost wished the pain would stop me. My chest was engraved in the shape of the letter Y, then it was sewn across my exposed skin. I carefully raised my hand to stitches. What did they do to me? My whole body hurt so much. Every movement I made, and even every breath I took, made me vomit in pain. Needless to say, I did my best to stay as still as possible. Maybe if I don't move, they'll think I'm dead, then they'll let me go. Yes, right, I did to myself. Have you said something, Darren? Sally asked. No, I just sighed. I thought I was alone, but I think I wasn't alone. It was hard to look around, after all. I suddenly had an idea. I can kill Mrs. Price and her coworkers, and then we'll all be free. Over the next several hours, I tried to plan a way to kill hell workers. And she planned until Shiloh was brought inside and looked directly at me. She noticed that she had a small needle sign in the fold of her elbow. I had noticed a scientist yesterday, but I assumed it was once. Seeing the same sign, now more red, made me anxious. What were they putting in Shiloh? Or worse, what did they take from it? Shiloh was taken out of her wheelchair. Then she went straight to me. Then she threw herself on the bed next to me and shook the mattress. Oh my God, I was in pain. The next thing I know is that I lost consciousness again. Why are they? Darren, I heard a whisper in my ear. Oh my God, another whisper. I opened my eyes this time. It was early morning, before the bell rang, and everyone was asleep. Even though I was confused, I assumed I was just dreaming. Darren, this time I realized I wasn't dreaming. I looked around to see if someone pretended to sleep, but everyone was in a daze. Darren, damn, this will never happen again. I groaned inside. I don't want to go on. Now I was ready to listen. It was Hunter who listened to the killing of people. I tried to talk to Hunter inside, but if he had heard me, he wouldn't respond. I went back to bed, then went back to sleep. Darren, her hair was scattered, and her eyes were still drowsy. She woke up, and Shiloh was leaning on me. I was screaming in your sleep, and I woke everyone. What were you saying? He looked at Shiloh. You were screaming. Not again. Damn you. Ah. I was embarrassed and tried to avoid Shiloh's look. Come, Shiloh said, and her behavior suddenly changed from anxiety to annoyance. Wake up. She grabbed me with an unusual force and pulled me to my feet. I was so shocked that I couldn't say anything. And to Shiloh curiously, my adorables, I suddenly realized that everyone was sitting on their bed, looking at me. We got out of the room in a hurry, and they pulled me off my wrist, which I felt was about to break in half. Oh, Shiloh, it hurts. Agreement, she said, pulling me toward the little hidden room. What do we do here? I asked her. I was a bad boy, Darren. She approached me, pulling something out of her pocket. What did you do? I was confused. I heard you had sex with your girlfriend, the one that killed her. She stared at her with expression. I've never had sex in my life, let alone have sex with my ex-boyfriend. I didn't. I cried angrily. and Shiloh kept walking towards me. Okay, that's fine. That means I'll have all of you myself. She realized what she was holding in her hand after the color was too late. A long needle contained a substance. She had already injected me with her. I felt a sharp sting, and then I started to feel unnatural symptoms. Shiloh put me on the antique little sofa in the middle of the room. It's okay, Darren. You'll be fine. The last thing I remember is her hand that caressed my hair. Feeling away. I woke up to a strange feeling. I felt like something was missing. I looked down and noticed that my pants were tight to my ankles, and I had nothing left but my underwear. W. That was all I could say. I quickly raised my pants, and I saw several red marks on my bare chest now. What? I was still amazed, but it seemed like there was about half a dozen love bites, or whatever I might call it, around my body. There was no trace of Shiloh. After I lifted my leg off the sofa, I finally sat upright. I felt something weird. I definitely felt infringed. I felt exploited. I prayed to Allah that Shiloh did not do what it seemed to have done. When I went back to the room, I saw that she was empty except for Shiloh, who was sitting on my bed, and looked happy herself. What happened? I asked her, leaning on the door frame, to seek help from him, and she got up and sat attached to me. I gave you the best time in your life. I laughed and then looked at me. Her eyes were shiny. Did you do what I think you did? I just realized I was still without a shirt, and Shiloh was wearing nothing but my shirt. I gave you the best thing ever. I gave you a goal. I made you helpful. I just stare at her. Go ahead, Darren, kill her. Hunter spoke to my mind. This time, I had only a few objections to his plan. Did you take my virginity? Finally, I asked her, and she just smiled. The more we look into each other's eyes, the more she smiles. I thought you loved me, Darren. I thought you wanted this. You did this for us. I tried to get away from it, but I hit the wall. Didn't you say you would help me get out of here? When I had my baby, they would have to get you out. I've seen it happen before. She hugged me tightly, and when she was released, she took the opportunity to push her away from me. I hurried down the stairs, and finally came out of the front door. I don't know why I haven't done that before. I ran as fast as I could, but suddenly stopped when I heard a powerful explosion. The pain was filled with every cell in my body. She turned around and saw Shiloh caught the rifle that her mother was keeping in the parachutes, and she was aiming at me directly, and smoke was rising from the barrel of the gun. When I looked at my bare chest, I saw a lot of confidence in my stomach, just a few inches from my belly button. When I saw blood flowing from my wound, I felt faint. Then I lost consciousness. Wedding party. Samara. Bye. Yeah, Samara. Bye. Samara. My thoughts were blurred. Gray color. The only obvious thing was a faint wheezing sound. All I could hear was piercing the thick layer of my brain. I tried hard to open my eyes, but I felt like a strong tape covering them. The oppressor was still hanging over the place, but I felt as if my chest was trustworthy. Suddenly the whistling stopped, and I felt something warm pressing hard on my chest. I was still unable to move, but this time I felt like the earth was sucking on my body. I woke up, sweating on a hospital bed. Oh my God, Darren. Doctors. He's alive. I got to know this voice. Was my mom's voice. But I killed her. How? My thoughts stopped when my mother hugged me tightly. Mom. Assuming it was love in her eyes, I looked at me. He knows it's me. I couldn't move. It was very uncomfortable. I felt weak and exposed. To ask her to get away from me, but I misunderstood him as a sign of affection. She was twisted under her grip and she whistled a whistle. Let me talk to the boy. It was a voice that I knew was my father's voice. I hurriedly pushed my mom and hugged me at an arm's distance. Darren, we thought you were dead. Don't scare him, Jeff. Soon my parents got into an argument. I sat there stunned because they were still alive. I was surprised that I was still alive. Was what happened to Shiloh just a dream? Did you kill my father? I started breathing quickly, until I reached the point of hyperventilation. And the sounds of the heart watcher whistling with my breathing accelerated. Oh my God, nurse. The surprising news was that my dad was alive, and I panicked. I didn't have an epileptic seizure or something like that. It was my father that made me so anxious. A nurse rushed in, carrying a bag. He's in panic. She said that she picked up a needle and inserted it into the intravenous solution attached to the back of my hand. In a moment, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. Doctors.